Unprotected by Brett Nelson. Chapter 2. Julie hummed, albeit off tune, her favorite hymn, What a Friend We Have in Jesus, as she swept the broom across the creaky boards of her wraparound porch. At the rumbling of an engine slowing on the main road, she turned and caught sight of a familiar truck turning into the driveway. She refocused on her sweeping until the vehicle stopped in front of her home and the engine died. "Morning, Julie," James called out as he tumbled from the truck. "James, how nice to see a friend so bright and early." "Gardening is best done in the cool of the day." He slammed down the tailgate of the truck and pulled containers of brightly colored flowers toward him. "Honey, let's face it, our next cool morning won't be until October," she chuckled. As much as he wanted to think otherwise, the statement carried not even the slightest ounce of exaggeration. Unfortunately, truer words were never spoken. He pulled the containers of flowers to the edge of the tailgate, all within easy reach, then glanced at the beautiful home. Though modest by city standards, it was grand and stately when tucked into the edges of the untouched forest that lined her property. To make ends meet, and to give her some much-needed socialization after her husband's unexpected death nearly 4 years ago, she had converted their home into what had become a now popular destination among the bed and breakfast crowds who came from all corners of the country. He tucked containers of petunias, marigolds, and impatiens into his arms and made his way to the flower bed that lined the left front side of the house. "I just baked a batch of fresh maple crunch muffins. Come have a couple before you get started," Julie said. He lined the plants on the ground and dropped to his knees. Tempting, but I'll pass. Sarah threatened to leave me if I put on another pound." "That wife of yours, she's the greatest thing since sweet tea. She would never send you away. If she ever does, though," she nodded toward the house, "I know where you can find a room for real cheap." Cheap rent and your delicious meals every day? Fat and single isn't a place I ever wanted to be, but if it happens, I want to do it right here." He plunged his hands into the soft, cool soil that he had loosened up yesterday in preparation for today's plantings. He and Julie often exchanged innocent flirtations. As he worked, he recalled one summer many years ago when they'd tried to be more than friends. It hadn't taken them long to realize that they were better suited for a nice friendship. Soon after their amicable parting, Julie had met and fallen in love with her now late husband Parker, who had arrived in town from military basic training. Parker Lewis, a fine man by anyone's standards, was a proud Marine in flawless physical condition. When he returned home after an injury in Iraq, he filled his time coaching Little League baseball and leading the local Boy Scout troop. He was a beloved figure in Bartlett's Bend. With a catch in his throat, James recalled the day that Parker had died. The entire town had mourned his death when, in the late hours of a brisk fall night, a drunk driver plowed him down while he changed a flat tire on Highway 37, south of Miller's Lake. To this day, any remembrance of Parker never failed to bring a tear to his eye. Julie was a strong person, and though he knew she missed her husband, she had quickly picked up the tattered pieces of her life and pushed forward with admirable, steely resolve. After weeks of agonizing contemplation and even more prayer, she decided to use a large portion of his insurance money to convert their home into what was now widely known as the Periwinkle Bed and Breakfast. Julie had introduced the two men, and their friendship blossomed from the first time they met. They had been the same age, only a couple months apart, when they received the news of their upcoming deployment to Iraq during the Gulf War. James and he, though nervous about going to war, found the prospect of all overseas adventure as a source of wild excitement. Julie, however, was less excited about their so-called adventure. Often beside herself with worry and fear, she frequently reprimanded them for discussing the trip as though it were a vacation, not a war. so they stopped discussing it around her. Ever the dutiful wife and friend, she kept in constant contact with both men while they served their country overseas. James still felt a palpable devastation at the news. An IED, improvised explosive device, had hit Parker's convoy as they patrolled somewhere in the regions of northern Baghdad. Once stable, Parker was medically discharged and sent home, leaving James to finish the last 4 months of his tour alone. Without his comrade and best friend, the dusty plains of Baghdad were no longer a grand adventure. Even with Parker safely home, Julie continued to send James encouraging letters, all of which, to this day, he kept tucked away in the inner regions of his closet. After leaving the military, and unsure of how to occupy his time, he had weighed his options, married Sarah, and settled on a landscaping business, because working under the grip of another person wasn't how he wanted to spend his days. He was busy planting a row of petunias when Julie came onto the porch with a tall glass of lemonade. "How are things coming along out here?" Her words pulled him from his wartime reverie. "Almost done with the front. I'll be back tomorrow to work on the back flower beds." "That'll be fine. I'll keep the mess out here to a minimum. I know you like to play spotless for your guests." "Oh, we'll deal with whatever temporary mess is necessary. What do they say? Things have to get worse before they get better. Now stop for a minute and have a cool drink. You need to stay hydrated in this infernal heat." She thrust a glass in his direction that already dripped with condensation, then nodded to the porch railing. "I wrapped a few maple crunch muffins for you and the family." He accepted the glass and slurped down half the beverage before stopping to catch his breath. The sweet and sour elixir caused a pang to spread through both of his jaws. She pointed at the half-empty glass. "There's more where that came from. Give me a yell if you need anything else," she called over her shoulder as she disappeared back into the house. An hour later, the flower beds were resplendent with dainty blossoms that within weeks would grow into an impressive explosion of color. He tossed all the empty plant containers into the bed of the truck and stuffed them snugly between the truck walls and the squares of sod so they wouldn't blow out and litter the streets. He dashed into the house for a quick goodbye. Back in the truck, he snapped the air conditioner to full blast, then flipped on the radio, which was mid-broadcast. "If this new amendment passes, the intention is not to make the American citizens vulnerable, as so many opponents surmise. It will empower local law enforcement officers to keep control over the inflating violent crime rates." Stupid, ignorant people don't even know that when they confiscate the weapons, it'll only affect the law-abiding citizens. The criminals won't obey the law and turn over their guns, that's for sure. All the dregs of society will be the only ones still armed, he hissed through clenched teeth. With an insolent snap of his wrist, he flicked off the radio and drove in silence. The sun was so low in the sky that it rendered the visor as nothing more than a useless cloth-covered piece of plastic. He raised his hand to shield his eyes from the glaring orb. In the distance, a vehicle was headed in his direction. As it drew closer, he straightened in his seat and squared his shoulders. A van driving way too fast fishtailed in the dirt road right in front of him. He opened his mouth in a silent scream when the van careened into his lane. At the last second, he jerked the steering wheel just in time to swerve out of the van's way and skid to a bones-shaking stop. "What the heck?" He flung open the door, jumped out, and glared after the van that didn't bother to stop to see if he was okay. "Crazy idiot! You could have killed me!" The words he yelled were heard by nobody but the nature that surrounded him. What kind of person almost causes a wreck, then doesn't even stop to make sure everyone's okay? He mumbled under his breath. He knew everyone in town and what they drove. The van was one he had never seen. Probably some teenager stole their parents' vehicle and is out on a joyride, he thought. He stared daggers down the now empty road, a cloak of heavy dust as the only evidence of the near miss. He turned to survey the truck. His front wheel teetered over the edge of a ditch, but he was confident he could back out without the assistance of a tow truck. He lunged into the cab, threw it into four-wheel drive, locked in the hubs, and with a grimace, he depressed the gas pedal. The tires spun in place for several seconds, tossing more dirt into the air and spreading projectiles of pebbles across the road. "Come on," he coaxed. Finally, with enough traction, he backed out of the ditch and pulled to the side of the road to inspect the truck for damage. The only evidence of the accident was grass and soil wedged under the front bumper of the truck, nothing that a trip through the car wash wouldn't fix. He breathed a sigh of relief and climbed back in. "Thank you for your protection, Lord." As fast as those knuckleheads were driving, a head-on collision could have gotten someone killed. It probably wasn't proper to call someone a knucklehead in prayer, but he was mad and deservedly so. A block before the sheriff's office, he considered whipping in to report the incident. At the last minute, he decided against it and zoomed past onto Fillmore, drove 3 more blocks, and turned onto his street. He pulled to a stop in front of his home, a 2-story white structure with the yard landscaped to perfect precision. The J-style porch that wrapped around the side and butted against a 2-car garage had been one of the selling points of the house. They had visions of sitting on the porch with coffee in the mornings before the kids woke up, or a glass of tea at night after they had gone to bed. In all the years they'd lived in the house, though, they'd yet to take time to enjoy even a minute of sitting on the porch. He grabbed the trash can from the side of the house, hauled it to the truck, and filled it with empty flour containers. "Daddy's home! Daddy's home!" His frown transitioned into a smile as a blonde, curly-headed girl raced out the front door. She wore denim overalls with a pink, ketchup-stained shirt underneath. "Oh, be careful, Maddie!" He rushed forward as his 3-year-old daughter hobbled down the concrete steps. As she conquered the first step in a tottery manner, he snatched her into his arms, hurried down the steps and into the yard, and tossed her into the air. "How's my little princess?" His smile widened at the sound of her joyful squeals. If there were any better sound than that of a child's laughter, he didn't know what it would be. He placed her back on the grass amidst a gaggle of giggles. She pulled a rumpled notebook paper from her pocket and handed it to him. "Look what I made you, Daddy." He opened it and gazed at a crayon drawing of a flower. He bent down to her level. "Why, thank you, sweetheart. This is the scariest dinosaur I've ever seen." Her nose scrunched into another round of giggles. "It's not a dinosaur, Daddy." He snapped it in front of his face and pretended to look at it again, then slapped his forehead. "Oh, silly me. It's a cool airplane." She put an arm on her side. "It's not an airplane." He sucked in a dramatic, playful breath. "It's not?" "Guess again, Daddy. Guess again." He whipped the paper in front of his nose and pretended to look through a magnifying glass. "Well, I'll be. That's the most beautiful flower Daddy has ever seen." He tucked the paper into his pocket and tickled his fingers against her chest, which drew another round of piercing laughter. "I think we should go right now and plant this flower." "No, Daddy, this flower is for the refrigerator, not the ground." "The refrigerator? You are so smart." He wiggled his fingers and she placed her hand in his. "Where's Mommy?" he asked as they navigated up the steps. Before she could answer, a soft voice said, "Who wants to know?" As they bounded up the last step, he paused to look through the screen door where stood a tall, slender, long-haired brunette. She wore a strapless, floral-patterned sundress with white sandals. Her beauty made many women jealous and many men smile, at least in his opinion. He scratched at the screen door with his fingers. Is your husband home, pretty lady?" "He won't be home for hours. You should come in," she answered in a seductive voice. He gave her a stern look, opened the door, and gestured her onto the porch. With an evil laugh, he whisked her off her feet and whirled her in circles. Maddie hopped up and down and clapped her hands. "Faster, Daddy, faster!" Sarah put her feet back on the ground to stop the whirling. "No, not faster, or there'll be more than dirt on this porch, and Daddy will have to be the one to clean it up." Maddie trudged up the leg of his blue jeans. "Me next, Daddy." He pulled his wife into his arms and brushed his lips against hers as the familiar wispy scent of floral and citrus hit his nostrils. He loved the way she looked, the way she smelled. He loved everything about her. "Me next, Daddy." He pulled away from his wife and plucked his daughter off the ground with his best attempt at a ferocious growl. He spun her around and around and around. Sarah stepped back into the coolness of the house to watch father and daughter from behind the screen door. She loved that he was such a good father to their children. "If she gets sick to her tummy, guess who's on cleanup duty?" He whirled her a couple more times, set her back on the ground, and laughed as she staggered in a dizzy frenzy. He grabbed her hand to steady her. "How about you take Daddy inside out of this heat, Toots?" She jumped again and teetered on her feet. "We put the flour on the refrigerator." He always chuckled at the way she struggled to pronounce refrigerator. "Okay, sweetie, let's go hang that flour." Sarah opened the door and stepped aside so they could enter. "Then you both need to skedaddle upstairs and wash up for dinner." Maddie sped ahead of them toward the kitchen. In the foyer, Sarah stood at the bottom of the staircase and yelled up to the second floor, "Gabriel, time for dinner, honey." Within seconds, the boy lumbered down the stairs in dark blue sweatpants and a white t-shirt emblazoned with the Bartlett's Bend Hornets logo across the chest. The name Tanner was embroidered on the back. Their son was the typical rambunctious 10-year-old boy who loved playing every sport his school offered, and even some they didn't. Like most boys his age, he dreamed of playing a professional sport someday. "Did you put your baseball uniform in the laundry hamper?" Sarah asked as he barreled past them toward the kitchen. Like most boys his age, he was a bottomless pit to feed. Yeah?" he called over his shoulder. His answer didn't carry the ring of truth. "Well, you better hope so, otherwise it doesn't get washed, and if it doesn't get washed, guess who doesn't get to play in the next game?" He stopped in his tracks and turned around with a smile of remorse. I think I forgot to turn my bedroom light off." Sarah chuckled and smacked him across the rear as he rushed past. That's what I thought, mister. And wash your hands before you come back down." In the kitchen, James made a show of attaching the newest drawing to the refrigerator with clear tape, much to Maddie's delight. Across the room, Sarah pulled a fragrant meatloaf and yeast rolls from the oven. She set them on the counter, then turned off the fire from under the pan of steamed green beans and the bubbling, sweet and spicy fried apples. She rubbed the top of Maddie's head as she buzzed past with the basket of rolls. "You ready for green beans, Toots?" "Green beans!" Maddie clapped. Once everyone was in the kitchen, they sat at the wooden dining room table. Gabriel reached across the table and snatched a hot roll. Sarah grabbed it from his hand and placed it on his plate with a soft thunk before he could take a bite. He looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Mom, I'm starving!" She snapped her fingers and fixed him with a stare. He dropped his hands to his lap and bowed his head with an exaggerated sigh. "Lord, thank you for my family," James prayed. "I ask that you keep us safe and healthy. Thank you for this food and for our home. Bless the men and women in our military and bring them home safe and sound. I ask for a continued blessing upon the good people of Bartlett's Bend. Please watch over our small town. We ask that you would forgive us where we failed you. Amen." They opened their eyes and laughed when a little voice broke the silence with a long, drawn-out, "Amen." "Don't forget, we all volunteered to serve on the city park cleanup team this weekend," James said as he dished wedges of meatloaf onto each plate. I think it's a great thing for us to do as a family. Sarah spooned green beans onto hers and Maddie's plates, then passed the bowl to James. Gabriel, you want to help your old dad plant trees along the community walking trail? James asked. Do I have a choice? James gave him a harsh stare. Sure, he replied with little fervor. Don't forget I need to be at the ball field by 4 for our game against the Huskies. James reached over and gave him a playful smack across the back of the head. Have you ever missed a game because we forgot to take you? He jerked in his chair when his son kicked him in the shin. He reached over to smack him again, then stopped short of impact when Sarah cleared her throat. Eat dinner, you boys. Stop roughhousing at the table. Maddie pointed a green bean at them. No roughhousing! Shut up, Maddie! Gabriel screeched. James touched his son's arm and shook his head. You know we don't say that word in this house. What word? Gabriel said with a petulant tone. You know what word. Gabriel shook his head and took a bite of his roll. Shut up is 2 words, not 1, he mumbled. James set his fork down and stared at him. Mouth off again and you'll go to your room without dinner. That's child abuse. I'll call someone. James slapped a spoonful of green beans onto Gabriel's plate. Well, if you think you'll have a better life in foster care than here with your mother and me, you get on with your bad self and give 'em a call. Gabriel stared at the empty tabletop in front of him, clearly trying to come up with a snarky comment and coming up short. That's what I thought. James placed the plate on the table and pushed it in front of the boy. Now eat. Gabriel glared at him, then rolled his eyes, and James wanted to drag him out of the chair and spank the insolent attitude right out of him. Instead, he turned his attention to Sarah and told her about the incident with the speeding van that ran him off the road. Gabriel's ears perked up, and his sulking came to an end. A car ran you off the road? Cool! Were you scared? Not cool, but yes, I was scared. That my truck got scratched, he answered in a goofy tone. Never mess with a man and his truck. You know what I'm saying? He raised his eyebrows in a comical expression. You're lame, Gabriel quipped with another eye roll. You know, my grandmother always says if you roll your eyes enough times, one day they'll stick like that. As much as he hated to think about it, they still had many years of teenage angst and attitude to deal with. Whatever, Gabriel said. James ignored him and refocused on Sarah, who stared back at him with concern. Are you about finished with the work over at the Periwinkle? She asked. He knew she would finish the discussion about the near miss with the van when the little ears weren't around. I have a few flowers to put down in the back, then I'm done. Do you have any other jobs lined up for next week? You mean besides the project at the park? She amended the question. Do you have any work coming up that'll give us a paycheck? I have several yards to mow this week, and I'll follow up with a couple of potential clients. Oh, and I almost forgot. I'm putting together a bid to submit to City Council for the new downtown project. Oh, that would be wonderful, Sarah exclaimed. That job would last through the rest of summer and possibly through the winter, too. I ran into Mayor Gibson at dinner last week, and he told me, unofficially of course, that if my bid were to come across his desk, I had a pretty good chance of landing the gig. Oh, James, that would be so great if you could win that bid. I've got an idea. James whipped his head over at Gabriel. Why don't we all pack up a few things and head over to Miller's Lake for a few days next weekend? We'll rent a cabin and go fishing and swimming. I think we could all use a little break from home. I could use a break away from home with some cool parents, but it looks like I'm out of luck, Gabriel muttered. James popped him behind the head again. Mom! Gabriel whined. Excitement exploded around the table as one talked over the other, and James congratulated himself for thinking of it. We can go hiking and boating, Gabriel said, and make s'mores over the campfire, right, Dad? Maybe, he shrugged, I guess it depends on if you're able to find some cool parents between now and then. Gabriel's chair screeched away from the table and he ran behind his dad and swatted him on the back of the head with a cackle of laughter. Sarah giggled, then snapped her fingers. That's enough. Sit down and eat your dinner, Gabriel. S'mores! Maddie raised her hands over her head in celebration. James nearly laughed at the sound of her feet kicking against the table legs in excitement. It's time for one little princess to get a bath, Sarah said after dinner to rein in the excitement they didn't need right before bedtime. Gabriel's a princess, Maddie covered her mouth and giggled. And Maddie's a little brat, Gabriel snapped. James stood from the table and picked up his plate to keep the sibling fight from escalating. Gabriel, my boy, how about we do some dishes while Mom gives the princess a bath? He crossed his arms over his chest and curled his lips into a perfect pout. I hate doing the dishes. Well, I hate going to work every day so you and your sister can have food to eat and so you can have all those uniforms that allow you to play every sport under the sun. But do you see me complaining? He walked behind his son's chair, scanned the room to see if Sarah was watching, then popped his son on the back of the head again. Now get up and bring your plate to the kitchen. If you're cleaning, you don't have time to pout. Gabriel glared up at him. I'm telling Mom. James shrugged his shoulder with a devious smile and popped him on the back of the head again. Go ahead, tell her. Be my guest. Gabriel pushed up out of the chair with a frown and kicked at his shin, but James stepped back just before contact. The boy disappeared into the living room and turned on the television. Young man, you have 5 seconds to turn off that television and get into the kitchen. Dad, he whined, Doctor Who is on. Well, you see, that's why I pay big bucks for DVR. Television off, now. A smile crept across his face when the television went silent and, seconds later, Gabriel skulked past him with his best attempt at a malevolent glare. Once the bath was over and the dishwasher loaded, James went to Maddie's room to read her a story, tuck her in, and nighttime prayers. Gabriel was quick to disappear to the seclusion of his bedroom and his favorite time waster, the PlayStation. Sarah cracked open his door and peeked inside the room. 1 hour of games, then to bed. He glanced in her direction for a split second and shot her a dirty look, then returned his attention back to the television screen. Jeez, Mom, how many times have I told you guys to knock first? She narrowed her eyes at him. Maybe you'd like to turn off the game and go to bed now? Sorry, Mom. 45 minutes and not a second longer. He swiveled around in his chair. You said an hour. She shrugged. That was before you smarted off. He swirled back around. She was sure she heard mutters of disdain, but she nudged the door closed, leaving it open a crack. When she stepped into their room, not to her surprise, Gabriel's door clicked the rest of the way closed. She closed their door behind her with a deep sigh of exhaustion. James was in the shower, butchering the art of singing with his rendition of Shot Through the Heart, and it brought her a well-needed chuckle. She sneaked into the humid bathroom, pulled her hair into a ponytail, and scrubbed the makeup from her face. With happy anticipation, she dropped into bed with the Jodi Picoult novel she had been trying to finish for the last month. As much as she loved her family and everything that came along with it, she missed the indulgent days of reading for hours at a time. These days, she felt guilty for spending even 10 minutes in the pages of a book, because there was always something around the house that needed her attention. James strutted out of the bathroom in a shroud of steam with a towel wrapped around his waist, his skin glistening with moisture. He plopped on the bed beside her, but she didn't look up from her book. You won't believe what happened at the Periwinkle today. One of the guests came up while I planted marigolds. She complimented my work and asked me for a quote to landscape her house. He scoffed. I was so excited until I learned she lives in Ohio. Or was it Oregon? I can't remember, but like I would really drive that far to... She dropped the book to her chest and squinted at him. I'm exhausted, hun. Can a tired mom enjoy a rare half hour of reading before bed? Sure, you can read for half an hour. You can read for however long you want. Sorry. He reclined back on the mountain of pillows and turned on the television, careful to keep the volume low so it wouldn't interrupt her reading. Thank you. She picked up her book, but after several seconds she rolled onto her side and ruffled his still wet hair with her fingers. Sorry, sweetie. I didn't mean to snap at you like that. He pulled her hand to his lips and kissed it. It'll take more than that to hurt my feelings. Did you get the gig with the woman from Ohio? She teased. Shh. He pointed to the television. The Young and Restless is on. Bo and Hope are about to be resurrected from the dead. Again. Bo and Hope are on Days of Our Lives, not The Young and the Restless, and they haven't been on that show for years. Really? Are you sure? He asked without removing his gaze from the screen. How do you even know about Bo and Hope? Are you a closet soap opera addict? He looked over at her and winked. She picked up her book and snuggled again into her pillows. After all these years, I thought I knew everything about you. He shrugged. I had a mom. She loved Bo and Hope. He turned his attention back to the television. Seriously, who wants to live in a world where Bo and Hope aren't on Days of Our Lives?